And hi, everyone. I'm going to let everyone in the room. Welcome, everyone, to our book study for the Perfume of Silence. Oh, let me turn that off again. Where is that? To our book study for. Huh. Sorry. uh, that always gets me every time. Isn't that funny? That second feedback when it starts to play back on YouTube. Welcome everyone to our book study, the Pure Presence book study, and the Perfume of Silence. We're looking at the last 5 or 6 pages in chapter 4, the mother of all problems, and we're joined, of course, with our co-host Jenny Beal from UK. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Bill. Hi, everyone.
Nice to see everyone. Thank you for joining with us today. And we're going to finish up the mother of all problems. And I was just talking to Jenny before we came on live, and I'm just going to share with you. I said, Jenny, where is that place where it talks about the mother of all problems? I was looking for, the namesake for the chapter. And it's pretty important. We didn't really, we just really barely touched on it. And it's an important little paragraph at the bottom of page 52. I wanted to sort of recap on that, if you don't mind. Is that okay with you, Jenny?
That's great, yes.
So it says that the I thought, it's the last paragraph on that section coming off of page 51 in the book, where the question says there is a strong sense of the I thought connected with watching. There is a reflection of the I in the mind. It is connected with the heart center. The more attention it receives, the more the trouble, it says. And then Francis's answer to that, or the rest of his answer that has the mother of all problems, is the last paragraph of the answer. And he says, the I thought is not a problem as long as it refers to consciousness. When it becomes attached to an attribute, to a noun, or an adjective, such as, I am a woman, I am a human being, I am happy, I am unhappy, I am frustrated, and so on, it becomes the mother of all problems. And in my mind, it becomes what we call the ego. It becomes the personal self-identity. And whatever we attach I am to, that's what we're saying I am. That's what we're saying we are. And we get all of the benefits and not so much benefits of that identity, right, Jenny?
Yes, absolutely. And the I thought in the part of the chapter that we're going to be dealing mostly with today, he's mainly talking about the I thought when it relates to that ego or the separate person. But as he explained in the part that you just read, it's not the case that whenever we use the word I, that means it's an ego type or an ignorant I thought. It isn't. If we say something like I need to lose weight, then that doesn't mean that we think that we are the body mind. It just means that we know we need to look after the body, and therefore the body needs to lose weight. And similarly, if we say I need to go shopping, again, it doesn't imply a separate self that actually does something and goes out shopping. So we have to be really quite careful what we mean by an ignorant I thought and an I thought which actually refers back to what we really are.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great distinction and an important one. And it's interesting that somehow, and I don't really know how this works, but somehow words have a vibrational frequency that that gives us an experience.
Yes, yes,
And when we attach the I thought to that vibrational frequency of a word that has a meaning for us, we we receive all the meaning that we have in that word, in the vibration that we receive.
yes, yes.
Yeah, it's really quite interesting how that works. And I also think that if you're like me, many of us, when we have that experience, when we say I am, it has a almost a it has an intimate relationship with the I. When we rest in I am, somehow it's like coming home. It's a whole different kind of a connection that the I gives when it's followed by am.
Yes, yes.
I find that to be very interesting. I really was contemplating that. And as we finish up this chapter, Jenny, where would you like to start as we look at the I thought and starting? I mean, we ended on 55, so you want to look at page 56?
Yes, well, let's start right at the top because I think this first question is very important. From this place of unknowing, do you lose the feeling of existence? And Francis says, no, you don't lose the feeling of existence. You are existence itself. And sometimes people feel a bit scared when they hear teachers say there is no person, and they think, oh, I don't think I'm going to go further along that line. But what is really meant is that there is no separate entity. So we lose the sense of being a separate self, but we gain the sense of being all that is.
Yes, that's we become, and I've had that experience or that feeling that that wow, if you're not a person and you're not a if you're not a body mind person, it must be very boring. And it's quite the opposite. As we were talking before we started the show, it's like this experience of not being the body enhances the body mind experience because it flavors it in a way that is much more intimate, much more connected, even in the seeming impersonal self experience.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it's really remarkable how that works. And Francis said, I sort of highlighted a statement right under that question where Francis said, ignorance at the, and this is the top of page 56, ignorance at the conceptual level is thinking that reinforces the idea that one is a body mind. Ignorance at the level of the body involves feelings that make us feel we are separate, that we are this body mind entity, that we have been created. These feelings trigger the personal I thought. This was his answer to that. And then he said, when such feelings appear, we should welcome the totality of the situation of which they are a part. When this has been completely welcomed, the attention is free to go elsewhere. We know that welcoming is complete when the situation has nothing new to teach us, when it becomes repetitive. Perhaps we can give the situation a few more moments to make sure we have looked at it from all sides. If there is no further unfolding and the feeling remains, we should ask ourselves whether we could live with this feeling for the rest of our life. If we do not want to get rid of it, if we could live with it forever, it means that it is no longer a problem. It no longer has the capacity to make us feel separate. However, if we want to get rid of the feeling, we must see this desire arises out of another feeling, a feeling of aversion, of resistance. Each time a feeling is completely welcomed, it loses its separating power. It becomes neutralized. Another layer of deeper and subtler feeling will now arise and should be welcomed in the same way. Layer after layer of feelings come to the surface in this way, and gradually, without our knowing it, the stronghold of the ego is exposed and dissolved. I feel that that is a really important statement there, and it's one that is more common than almost anything that I have come across. And I have conversations with people all the time that are trying to get rid of the pain or get rid of the experience, try to, to resolve the situation. And I first saw this when I met Rupert, and it was the situation where my wife had an awakening experience when I just really copied what Rupert was saying in his retreat when he said, he was telling us, can you just love that experience? Just love it, welcome it. And it's not the same thing as can you accept it? Can you accept everything just as it is? No, you need to welcome it and love it and welcome it to stay as long as it wants to stay, as for the rest of your life if necessary. And that kind of a welcoming is a different kind of an acceptance.
Yes, yes. And he talks, as you read, about these layers of feeling, and that's really quite important, because he's really answering a question which is from someone who understands that they are not a separate entity, but there are feelings within the body, or feelings that arise within the body, which say that yes, he or she is separate, and it's really a process of uncovering those layers. Rick had a question which he sent to you, where he said, Francis says, welcoming the totality of a situational feeling can lead us upstream to the I thought, which in turn is reabsorbed in the source. Isn't the I thought only being solidified and reinforced when it makes claims and identifies with a feeling? Well, not really in these circumstances, because if you already understand that you're not separate, and if you don't understand you're not separate, then that's where you start. Before you even start looking at feelings, you start with that. But once you have really understood that understanding never ever leaves you. You always have access to it. So in his answer, Francis is starting from that point. There's no ignorance at the level of the mind, in other words, but there is still ignorance at the level of the body. So if we're welcoming the totality, an I feeling that is just part of that totality will be seen just as a bodily sensation among other bodily sensations. And if we're open and we allow that to happen, we welcome it, then somehow it does seem to take us upstream to an I thought that is associated with that sensation. But that I thought immediately meets with our clear understanding that we are not separate. And so it simply dissolves, it simply disappears. So there's really not any question of the sense of separation being solidified in those circumstances.
Yeah, it is the place, the understanding and the clarity around this is the is the mechanism of freedom. It is the mechanism of a self-release that we don't, is subtle, that we don't realize that we have attached our identity to the separation instead of the inclusion of all experience.
Yes, and you know, once you have a clear understanding of what you really are, that doesn't mean that ignorant I thoughts won't sometimes arise, because they will, just out of habit, because there are habits of mind, just like there are habits of body. They will still arise, but they have no substance, because because immediately they meet up with what you really know, with what you really understand.
Yeah.
So they just melt away. You just allow them to disappear, and don't judge them. Don't judge yourself for having such thoughts. And the same thing with feelings. Feelings are a little bit different, because it takes quite a bit longer for all the feelings in the body associated with separation to disappear, because I think there may be laid down quite a lot earlier, right in childhood, when that idea of ego is being formed. I think it's formed first in the body. That's how it seems to me. So I think that's something that's much more ingrained,
Yeah.
and takes quite a bit longer to dissolve.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. And it's unconscious. It's not. It takes some kind of a trigger to connect with that. And I remember I had a rather uh, s- amazing awakening experience that from a situation that happened when I was a young little boy that was affecting my marriage. And I didn't know it until I mean it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I didn't realize that I had this old memory that my mother didn't love me. And it was a conversation. I was on the phone with my wife. She was in Denmark, and we had filed for a divorce because we had such conflict in our relationship. And we're both, spiritual teachers and course students, and we couldn't shake this thing. And we were having this conversation when she was over in Denmark teaching, and we were talking about this book that I was reading from Howard Hendricks. She said, I don't want anything to do with that book, and I'm done with this marriage. It's over. And I said, well, I think I'm going to read this book. I'm going to follow it. And she said, well, what is it about? And I said, well, this guy talks about things that you do as a child that affect you as an adult, and you don't even know about it. And she said, well, what do you mean? Give me an example. And I said, well, I remember as a little boy, I must have been 5 or 6 years old, I had this question. I wonder why mommy doesn't love me. And I remember that question as a little boy, and all of a sudden, Bill, the grown-up body, was having this connection with that little boy, Billy, and I started crying. As a grown man, I started crying because Billy didn't believe that his mommy loved him, and I had this whole thing happen. I was bawling. She came back from Denmark. I don't know what happened to me, but psychologically something unattached itself, and I became free. And our marriage, we now we love each other like crazy. We called off the divorce. It was a whole big thing. It was amazing how something that was buried alive that young affected me in my 60s.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, remarkable.
It,
So
it is, yes.
I didn't mean to digress, but that really
No,
lined up right with that statement that you made.
absolutely, yeah.
So,
Yes, yes.
what else do you want to look at on this page, Jenny? Is there anything else? Oh, and we have a few questions on the board. Maybe we should look there.
Right.
Michael Granite said that how does no self relate to the feeling of existence?
Okay, well, no self is really, I think, a Buddhist concept. I'm not an expert in Buddhism, but there is a kind of parallel with the experience of consciousness without objects. If you sink into that feeling of I am, if you sink right below, you can think of I am as being a kind of doorway, and you sink through that door, right down beneath all the thoughts and feelings and perceptions. Then you reach a space of kind of emptiness, of there's nothing there, but it's not a blankness. It's called consciousness without objects, or nirvikalpa samadhi, and there's no objective experience of any kind. So that really is the equivalent in this teaching of no self. It's a feeling of I am nothing. I am not a thing. I'm not an object. So all there is in that experience is a kind of non-experience of what I really am. But existence is when you come out of that that feeling, then existence is the encompassing of all thoughts and feelings and perceptions, and you can recognize. Once you have experienced that no self, you can recognize two types of experience. One, the type that everyone recognizes, is phenomenal experience. So that's experience of objects, thoughts, perceptions, sensations are all objects. And the other is that experience that you had just of I am, that pure feeling of being, and that's a noumenal experience, and they're both really two aspects of existence. So what Francis says is that it's one of the things that's very obvious to us is the statement, there is something rather than nothing. And if we take that statement, and if we take various other statements, like what to do with what consciousness is, to do with there is only one reality, then we come to the conclusion that what I am is consciousness, and that consciousness is unlimited, etc.
Yeah.
So that's really where it fits in within this teaching.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in my experience is this goes back to what you were saying, that people are afraid of being nothing, and the truth is quite the opposite of that, because the experience of being nothing and everything is quite a visceral experience of beingness. It's not a nothingness experience. I am presence has a visceral feeling that comes with it.
Yes, yes. So sometimes for a lot of people, it starts as a feeling of I am nothing, and then as we look further outwards, then we arrive at the broader sense of I am everything. All that is myself. There's
Yes,
nothing outside of myself.
yes, yes, and it takes on an extraordinary experience in a bodysuit.
Yes, yes.
Rachna had said it took me ages to realize this, but with welcoming is also the understanding that the presence or absence of feeling is irrelevant to happiness. Yes, it's true.
Yeah, yes,
Yes, it's when
exactly.
you have a high participation in life, low attachment to anything happening in favor of your expectation.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And Rick said our nature peace is prior to and not dependent on the good versus bad perspective of the I thought. Yes. Yes. It's a non-dual. There's no duality in that.
Yes, yes. I'm not sure it relates particularly to the I thought. I think it's just the duality of mind.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and in a relative sense, then we do need the concepts. Do need some dualistic concepts, and some of them do relate to good and bad. But what we're really talking about here is what's beyond that relative level, the absolute level.
right, right, right. Don Vernine says, that is the practice, and you cannot not practice. Either you are practicing loving whatever arises, or you are practicing judgment and resistance. And Don, I wouldn't, I don't know that I would put it that way, because when there is a practice, but the practice goes away and becomes spontaneous. It's a spontaneous non-doership. It's a spontaneous just allowing that isn't really allowing. It's just a happening. How would you answer that, Jenny?
Yes, I think exactly that. That we need to recognize that consciousness is producing all the experiences that we have, whether they're loving experiences, whether they're hating experiences, whatever is going on, and that's the choice of our real self consciousness out of its freedom. So as soon as we talk about practice, then we're implying that there is a separate entity that can practice something. But ultimately, there is no practice. All there is we can think of it either as allowing, or at a later stage, it becomes just enjoying. Just seeing, enjoying, perceiving, experiencing.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it is interesting that it seems like, and there are, it's a kind of a paradox because there are practices that begin to help you to remove the habits until there's no longer the residue and the habitual uh, movement that the body mind has been in control of and been and managing, and then when that is sufficiently realized or established, then those tools that were used in the early practices no longer become necessary.
Yeah, yes, exactly. There's no tools of any kind really become necessary, because what we're doing is at every moment, or not doing, is there is just the recognition that there is no separate entity that needs to practice or do anything. If there is judgment and resistance, there's judgment and resistance, and that's exactly what consciousness is choosing in this moment, out of
Mm.
its freedom.
Yes.
And we are that consciousness. What actually happens, we find, and this is often conceptualized in a different way. But what actually happens is, when we hear this teaching, when we have this very clear understanding that we are not this separate, limited body mind, um, then things change. Our habits of thinking just naturally change. Eventually, also our habits of feeling and feeling the body also change. But that that just happens, and it happens as a result of this clear seeing. And we might think, oh, well, I attended all these meetings and I read all these books, and so it's all a result of all of that. But it's not really like that, because it was the choice of consciousness to that this body mind attended all these meetings and read all these books. So there was no entity that did anything at all ever.
Yes. Yeah, we think there is. I had a meeting with Francis a few months ago, back in September, and one of the things he was I mean, he was really focused on. He said there are no accidents. There are no accidents. It's not an accident that we are having this meeting right now in this moment. And consciousness chooses all of these things, and the body mind steps in instantaneously and wants to take credit for it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm,
it's really crazy how that works, but that is how it works. It happens in the nanosecond. I did that.
yes.
Yeah. So anyone has a question and you would like to ask the question, please just use the raise hand feature if you would like to verbally state a question about any of the content, any of the pages or the questions or the answers that Francis gave or the questioner gave. There's another, if you don't have another section to go to, this is a little piece on page 57 that Francis was talking about the feelings that we learn. He says in the second paragraph that, or I guess in the very top paragraph, two things may happen in this welcoming. If we stay with a feeling and completely welcome the totality of the situation, this is a continuance of that other one, it will lead us upstream. Oh, you read this part already, didn't you?
Yes, that was Rick's question, was about that. Yes, so
Okay,
that's what
okay.
he.
So
Yes.
we don't need to re-talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was something I thought was really great, really helpful actually on page 59, where Francis is talking about using the essence of higher reasoning. that I thought was very interesting. He says in the second paragraph down at the top, from the top of 59, I'm not sure where it is in Kindle. It says, it is also necessary to have practical thoughts, for instance, to make plans. And this is important for people that are on the spiritual journey, because even though I just said that Francis said that there are no accidents, we still plan for things. And A Course in Miracles says that a mind that plans is separate from its source. And I think there's a sort of a where those two references don't say the same thing because they're not coming from the same place. But right here, it says it is also, Francis says that it also necessary to have practical thoughts, for instance, to make plans, to book the car into the garage, to make a shopping list, and so on. There is nothing wrong with these types of thoughts. They are an appropriate response to the current situation and do not need to hinge around a separate entity. There is another type of thinking that doesn't depend on, create, or maintain the idea of a separate entity, and these are thoughts about truth. They come from the truth and they lead us back to it. We could call it higher reasoning. It is only the first type of thinking, which revolves around a separate entity, that leads to misery. And I think that those two distinctions are pretty important. One is a focus on the body-mind's experience and the safety and protection for the body-mind, and the other one is focused on the truth. That's really what the two distinctions are in that understanding. What would you say about
Yes,
that?
well, if you take that answer as a whole, he's really saying there's four types of thinking. So the question was originally about daydreaming, and so he defines daydreaming as captive thinking. So it's captive in the sense that there is a someone, a separate entity to whom the daydream is happening. And he says, as you read, it's only this type of thought that revolves around a separate entity and leads to misery. And then we've got free thinking, which is any kind of creativity. It's just where the mind just wanders all over the place, and that it's not revolving around a separate entity. It's just having fantasies, I guess, and those particularly in an artist, those are really what leads to creative work. And someone who isn't an artist, then they don't have a means of expressing it, of course. Then you've got the practical thoughts, as you said, like the shopping list and so on. There's absolutely nothing wrong with any of those kinds of thoughts. They're necessary. And then finally, thoughts about truth, which come from truth and lead back to truth. And that higher reasoning, well, often it revolves around questions which are those very, very deep questions which occurred to us as children. What am I really? Why am I here on this earth? What is all of this existence, this universe? It's so extraordinary, and it's those kinds of thoughts, and they lead to higher reasoning, in the sense that we will often put a bit of logic around them, and look at our experience around them,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
arrive at some conclusions.
right. And one tends to focus on the body, the personal self, the egoic identity, and uh, give the I identity to that experience, and the other one in a contemplative experience is able to have glimpses of the essential self. So, it really does lead back to the self identity, to consciousness itself, and for that direct experience is very helpful.
Yes, the mind comes to stop after all the thinking. Then that higher reasoning will often leave the mind in a state of stillness. It just comes to a stop,
Yeah,
and that's when we reach that nominal experience of what we really are.
yeah. And it causes us to say, "Huh, what was that? I want some more of that. I like that. That feels right." Rachna has a question for you, Jenny. Here, do you see it? Based on your comment earlier, Jenny, perhaps we also bed down the I feeling from when feelings come up in fight or flight, of course, to protect the body, but we conflate ourselves with this feeling. Question.
I think that can happen. I think it tends to happen more in psychological circumstances. If we if we're walking through the streets and we're feeling a sense of danger, and there's this feeling, well, I need to. Well, in the case of a woman, it's generally flight. Maybe a man might turn around and fight, but I think we'd probably flee. So I think in those certainly my experience in that kind of circumstance is that there's no there's no I feeling, and in fact sometimes there's a tremendous clarity. Then I can remember a number of incidents when um, I've been in a serious situation in a glider or scuba diving or something like that, and there's this tremendous clarity. There's a huge amount of energy, but a tremendous clarity, and there's absolutely no I feeling whatsoever. But I think in a psychological sense, then if someone has insulted us, then we might feel a sense of anger, which is a bit more like the fight mechanism, or we might feel, okay, I don't want to have anything to do with them anymore, and that will be a flight mechanism. And in that case, almost certainly there's an I thought associated with it. I don't know whether you agree with that much.
Yeah, I mean that sounds reasonable. It's almost like something else takes over, and it's not usually fear. It's like a movement starts happening, and if the body mind is skilled at like helping someone clear their throat or helping someone that you can all of a sudden movement just happens. It just starts to happen. And I don't think it's based on fear. I think it's based on clarity, like you said.
Yes, I think when there's a real um, situation in the physical world which needs a response, then that's certainly what I've found. But I think it's the fake psychological situations which um, where the I thought is, or the ignorant I thought we should say, is conflated with it.
Yeah. There's another question from Lindsay. Is the category of free thinking without an entity pertaining to one example of an artist or musician with artistic expression, or 2, thoughts about inanimate objects. There is a good piece of paper for my next design. I think that free thinking, or just being open in a spontaneous freedom, artists live there more than people that are mental, living in a mental intellectual experience. Artists seem to have, and musicians seem to have, more openness for that frequency. That's just my thought.
Well, maybe as a mathematician, then I would say, and it's a moot point whether mathematics is an art or a science. I think Francis has said it's also an art, but it's certainly mental, and certainly that kind of free thinking is absolutely fundamental to mathematics. You cannot do it without.
Yeah.
I would say even more than any kind of art, really.
Yeah.
It's, yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question, Lindsay. Did that answer your question? Would you like to come on the screen and ask it directly?
Yeah.
Hi, Lindsay.
Hi, I'm sorry. I must not articulate very well because I have to keep coming on with my questions. So I have a bad example, and I thought about it. What about free thinking pertaining to just, it's not practical, it's just a thought, it's about inanimate objects, it doesn't involve an artistic or an expression of any kind of, like, free fine arts thinking or anything, but something like the ocean is rather calm today, or the sand is full of seaweed, something, but those aren't revolving around an I thought, it's revolving around inanimate objects. Would that be considered free thinking?
Absolutely. And I think I wouldn't agree that it's not creative. I think it is. It is creative in a sense. You're noticing what's around you, and you're noticing the beauty in it. And I think that noticing of beauty is in itself creative. You could be not noticing anything. You could be walking by the sea and not really seeing anything, having lots of thoughts around a separate entity. But when you're noticing and you're appreciating, then that's beautiful.
Okay, that helps me, because when I read this in the chapter, I spent probably 4 or 5 days just locating where my thoughts were in each of the categories, and it's a tremendously helpful exercise. I found it to be.
Yes. I wouldn't worry about any kind of free thinking, even if it doesn't have any form of artistic expression. You may be no good at painting the sea or writing a poem about the sea. It doesn't matter. It's still creative in itself. So I really wouldn't worry about it.
Okay. Yeah, no, I was just trying to categorize, and then it came up, well, wait a minute, what am I, if I'm not, what about all these thoughts that are just not practical, but just noticing? Thank you, that helps me a lot.
The arch categorizer, Lindsay.
Right.
There's a question from Rick. What can be said about judgment? Some state that all judgment is wrong. Some state that all judgment is wrong. However, it appears from an evolutionary perspective, judgment is a very successful survival mechanism. However, when it stems from the I thought, it takes on a completely different nature, that of ignorance or Maya. Is this a correct view?
Well, it's interesting, Rick, because Francis often uses the idea of an independent judge when we're not sure whether something we're about to do is personal or impersonal. He says, imagine you are an independent judge, and you looked at the situation from the point of view of everyone involved, all the sentient minds, all sentient beings involved, and for that matter, the earth, the universe as a whole. What judgment would you come to? And that kind of judgment, there's nothing wrong with that. That's an appropriate use of the mind. I think the only kind of judgment, which I think you're in fact hinting at, that is a problem, is where the judgment is based on the desires of a separate entity, and it's not taking into account the totality. So I think anything that takes into account the totality, and then yes, you're absolutely right. Judgment is essential for survival. If we think of animals going out to hunt food, if my cat goes outside in the garden, the cat has to make a judgment as to whether it's best to go and have a look for the wood mice in the wood, or to go and sit by the vole holes out in the meadow. And she's making a judgment about that, and that's based on experience. And that's very sensible. That's part of survival for being a cat. And there's many examples at the human level as well, where we make judgments. We make judgments about the sort of job we want to do, whether it's going to provide enough money for our family. That's not judgment around an I thought. That's just intelligent judgment.
Yeah. And it's practical reasoning, and it's often, I mean, you can make decisions or judgments from half-assed collection of the things involved, or you can go about it in a more methodical way, or you can, and all of it is available. Inspiration is available for whichever direction you take. I work with people all the time that make decisions too fast. They don't think about everything involved, and it's a waste of time decision. Whereas people that really have a little bit more methodical, more practical reasoning involved, they're connecting with more of an inspired, I would say, judgment or a decision coming from a different place.
Yes, Francis also talks about those decisions coming from love and truth and beauty, and all of those things really coming together. And I think that's true. If people make slapdash decisions, they're inaccurate, then that's not beautiful. And if it affects other people, then it's not loving either. So it's all of those natural qualities of the absolute that come together.
Yeah. Well, we're almost out of time. We probably should look at another couple of pages here. Do you have another question you want to look at, Jenny?
Yes, there are several questions about the relationship with the teacher, and there's one that I think is particularly important. He explains that a teacher doesn't regard you as a separate entity who needs a awakening. When he answers your questions, he's addressing the reality that you are, the real self. And even if you as a student take the answer as being addressed towards a me, a separate self, then somehow the seed of truth will have been implanted in you, which might germinate a little bit later. I think that was quite an important point.
Yes. Yes. Well,
And he says from this point on, it's this impersonal friendliness that the teacher and the student share that becomes both the means and the expression of the teaching. And that's very beautiful.
Where is that?
That's on page 61.
61. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the idea that, I mean, I like the idea that the teacher is not special, but it's also a very valuable, essential ingredient in helping someone that's searching for truth, that is resonating with these ideas, to have someone model the confidence and the certainty of the direct experience. And that's something that you see. I saw it in early on. I saw it in Muji. I saw it in Rupert. I see it in Francis. I see it in in my wife. I see it in other teachers that we bring into the conferences. That a teacher can be very helpful, not as an idol, not as putting up on a pedestal as they got it and I don't, but a demonstration of someone that really has connected with that. Well, you model that very well, Jenny, and many here with their questions, you can tell that they are established in the truth, and the questions even come from that same place.
Yes, it's really a sharing of that same space of understanding, so that when a teacher in Francis answers your questions, then you feel they're your answers. They're your answers that come from within you, because you and Francis are the same self, the same consciousness. There is no separation. I think certainly I felt that very strongly.
Yeah. Yeah, he gave a really great answer in that the mouth doesn't always, the mouth and the ears, they work the same. They work for the same body-mind experience. There's no discrimination there.
Yes, exactly. That's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mm.
Let's see. I like what William Price said. He said, not judgment, but discrimination, or viveka in Sanskrit. And Mike King has discernment versus judgment. And that's kind of how would you answer what Mike King said? Discernment versus judgment.
Yes, I think it's I think it's just a matter of words, really.
Just words.
Yes, I mean the Sanskrit words are often translated as discrimination or discernment, and that's what's regarded as necessary as part of the path. And that's really, it's that discernment, that discrimination, which takes you along the inward facing path through the neti process. But in ordinary life, I think we do tend to talk about weighing up pros and cons and making a judgment about things. And I think we can be perfectly practical about that. I don't think we need to shy away from the word judgment, as long as we are not associating it with a separate entity who has a particular point of view which revolves around itself.
Yeah. Yeah. I often find myself, if I'm really, if it seems like I have two choices, I find myself just pausing and contemplating the two choices and leaving it, leaving the the space open, and then all of a sudden Bill knows what to do in a matter of minutes, could be hours. But I find myself now just more in contemplation of what seems to be choices, and then allowing the open space of what we're talking about higher reasoning. Higher reasoning now has an open space to imbibe an idea that carries confidence, certainty, and peace with it.
Yes, Francis says something very similar. He says if you don't need to make a choice, you don't need to make a decision, you don't need to take an action, then don't. Just wait. And at some point, when it becomes clear, and that happens automatically, what the choice or the action needs to be, then you can take it, unless action is demanded and you still don't know, and then you just have to do your best.
Yes,
that's how he puts it.
Wow. Well, we've come to the end of our hour, everyone. It's so good to see everyone this week, and thank you for being here. Thank you, Jenny, for co-hosting this experience with us. And next week we'll meet again for Chapter 5. Don't leave the throne. Not sure what that's all about, but it sounds good. And we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for being here.
Bye, everyone.